This is Healthcare Now Radio's Talking the Walk. Come along with us as host Tom Testa and his guests discuss the strides being made toward actionable changes in the industry. It's a fast-paced 30 minutes, so keep up. And now, here's Tom Testa.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking the Walk. I'm your host, Tom Testa. Today, I'm joined by Joe Mundell. He's the President and Chief Revenue Officer of Sonicu. Joe has spent more than a decade helping grow Sonicu and brings nearly 20 years of experience working with healthcare organizations on the operational and compliance challenges they face every day. During today's discussion, we're going to focus on a part of healthcare that doesn't always get the spotlight, but plays a critical role behind the scenes, and that's environmental monitoring. We'll talk about how organizations are modernizing workflows, shifting from reactive to proactive operations, and what real day-to-day impact these changes are having on care teams. But first, I want to welcome Joe to the show. Joe, great to have you on the show.
Hey, Tom, thanks. Glad to be here.
Well, glad to have you, Joe. I want, before we get into the heart of our conversation, I want the audience to hear a little bit about yourself. Talk to us about your background and what inspired you along your career journey that led you to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to. I spent most of my career focused on building, scaling healthcare technology businesses, right? And today I lead Sonicu. And we focus on the environmental monitoring across both healthcare and other highly regulated spaces. And, what really drew me into this space is that it sits right at the intersection of patient safety, compliance, operations. And these are areas that historically haven't really got the same level of innovation as other parts of healthcare. So, when I first got involved, I was a little surprised, to be honest, about how much was still being, managed manually, coming from another part of healthcare where things are a little further along on the technology side, but paper logs, disconnected systems, fragmented processes. And, when you look at it, though, the stakes are really high. The value of medication efficacy, patient safety. And that's kind of what got me excited, right? It's like the opportunity to bring in a modern, connected technology platform into an area of healthcare that really impacts, patient safety, which we're all concerned about, but also the operational efficiency piece that gets us excited here at Sonicu.
No, that's great, Joe. And tell us, and these are things, it's true, like as much as we think a lot of healthcare technology is modernized, there's still a lot of that old school stuff that we're still seeing going on, like the paper trails and stuff like that. Before we dive into the couple questions here to get into that, tell us a little bit about Sonicu and overall what you do and who you serve.
Yeah, for sure. So, Sonicu is a cloud native platform. We have a host of application-based sensors and, a real scalable, modern cloud native platform to help our customers. And the majority of our customers are healthcare related, right? So hospitals and all the spokes from a hospital, physician networks and ambulatory surgery. But we're also in the life science space and outside of the hospital space and healthcare with, large compounding infusion operations across the country. But they all kind of have the same challenge, right? It's getting the data they need for both regulatory compliance and asset protection in a platform that they can use to, kind of transform their operations and scale it across their operations. And so anywhere where those things are needed, Sonicu lives.
That's great, Joe. I want to dig into some of those challenges right now. Let's talk about how today many hospitals and labs are still relying on paper logs. You hinted that in the opening, and manual tracking for things like environmental monitoring. Why has this area lagged behind in digital transformation? And what are the risks or limitations that come with staying manual?
In the hospital space, I think we see pharmacy as the one that's probably the most adopted to some type of automated monitoring. Although we still see the local data loggers that don't really kind of give them the standardization. But we see manual process everywhere in hospitals. And I think it's just kind of an offshoot of just a fragmented policy by departments. More and more hospitals are starting to standardize, but I think the majority still is pretty fragmented. When you look at manually logging, it's just to really give the bare minimum for regulatory compliance, right? And the issue there is not effort. The issue there is risk. Right. So case in point, the basic regulatory requirement might say, hey, every day you check this refrigerator in your lab twice a day and you write that temperature down. And we see labs still doing that sometimes today. And it really kind of creates that false sense of security, right? Because you're just capturing data in a moment of time, what do you do the other 99% of the time, right? We had a use case where one of our hospital customers told me a story. They had their paper log, they checked it at 7 o'clock in the morning and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Or someone checked the temperature at 7, temperature was fine. When they closed the door bounced back open and they walked away, they didn't notice. Somebody saw the door was open at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and closed it. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they checked the temperature's fine, right? And so that false sense of security is just it's not ideal, right? And the risk of missing excursions, the efficacy of medications, the efficacy of research samples, research material, reagents, all those things, and the gaps in audit trails. So staff spends a lot of time in hospitals just manually documenting. And I'll tell you another story about that. So we have a hospital customer and we're monitoring their pharmacy. And with an automated platform from Sonicu, I had the opportunity to sit in front of their CEO. I asked him first, what's the biggest problem with your hospital today? What's the biggest problem in healthcare today? And he said staff, labor, rising cost of staff. And so we talked about that for a minute. And then I asked him, I said, when you look across the entire, hospital system and you look at how much time staff is spending just manually logging and manually compiling reports to achieve regulatory compliance, what did you find? And he said, well, Joe, I don't think we've ever done that, right? And I said, well, I didn't think you did. That's why I asked the question, but I'd like to do this with you. And so we went through and did this, and we found, and this was a 129-bed hospital, so a small community hospital. We found 300 things that every day his staff was writing down twice a day, on top of what we were already monitoring in the pharmacy, right? And so it becomes a really simple ROI to transition to a digital platform like Sonicu, but it also becomes, it tackles one of those core challenges around having staff spend time doing more mission-centric types of activities, right? They're there to take care of patients, not to do manual logging, right? So it's just a win-win when you can look at a hospital from that type of point of view.
Those are great examples from the lab fridge to the manual labor stuff. Are those the tipping points? What would you say? So what are the tipping points that kind of make a CEO go, we got to modernize things around here? Is it compliance pressure, security? What kind of things, operational efficiency? What would you say are those tipping points?
I think it's a great question. It can vary, obviously, but anytime there is gaps in compliance, even if the Joint Commission comes through and does an audit and finds a lot of things that aren't being done correctly, it can boil up. If there's loss in product because you have an inadequate system, those things can boil up. But I really see what's driving kind of modernization is the shift in healthcare from checking a box to trying to run a more efficient operation, right? Traditionally, healthcare hasn't been as efficient as other industries from an operational standpoint. And in today's environment, reimbursement cuts that have happened and the rising cost of staff and labor,
right,
forcing these hospitals to take more of an operational approach, right? And so regulation plays a role, but also a big driver is visibility, right? So healthcare systems, they want to standardize across locations. They want to reduce risk. They want confidence in their data. Sometimes it seems like an impossible task, and we can talk about how easy implementation can be with a system like ours. But when you end up with a connected technology and you standardize that technology and you build an SOP across your facilities, this really becomes part of the infrastructure, and it becomes a tool and more of a foundation for operations. And everybody wants that how do you fill that gap and get clients to where they want to go?
So it sounds, that brings me to my next question. We're seeing a lot across healthcare how what you're explaining there, we're moving from reactive to proactive operations, right? So how does that apply specifically to environmental monitoring, and what does staying ahead actually look like in practice for a hospital or a lab?
Yeah, unfortunately, right, I guess fortunate for our business, but unfortunately for the customer, we often get called after the fact. That's very common. When we had a big loss, we had a system we thought going to alert us, but it was brittle, didn't have redundancy, didn't have reliability. And it's never from bad intent. It's always just, there's single points of failure sometimes that cause these things to happen. But really the shift, around going from reactive to proactive is kind of twofold. One, you look at an automated continuous monitoring platform that has reliability, that has redundancy, which we've worked really hard here to build that into our platform so that if your network goes down, you're not losing data. If there's a power outage, you've got battery on the devices, and there's data redundancy, there's transmission redundancy, and all those kinds of things, because we're trying to help them prevent spoiled medications or worse, vaccines that have lost efficacy, and avoid those compliance issues. And really going from, the reactive, like you said, to proactive, I think that is kind of the baseline. Those are table stakes today. But above and beyond that, we get a lot of data in the platform, and we're able to take that data and really give meaningful insights. We can put advanced analytics on top of the platform, so you can pinpoint, where you have problematic equipment and be more predictive about those things. Some of our hospitals are managing thousands of assets, and to be able to pinpoint 3 or 4 that are showing behavior that looks like it's going to fail, and then with all the advanced analytics available to us today, to be able to really show them with pretty good probability that these are the problem children that could cost them, lost product. There's a huge ROI on that, right? So I think we're moving away from that reactive to proactive just by putting our platform in. But I think we're just getting started on what we can really do to transform operations with some of the advanced analytics that we're providing our enterprise customers.
So do you sense that there or see a lot of outdated devices, things like that, where your technology will help kind of add some life to that, or help, like you said, have them go, gee, we got to start replacing some of this stuff?
Yeah, there's a couple things there, Tom. It's a really good question. So I guess the good news is that hospitals were early adopters of temperature monitoring, right? And so, you think about the 1990s, early 2000s, if you were implementing temperature monitoring in your pharmacy, even though there's a lot of manual process that still goes on, they were doing some parts of their hospital with temperature monitoring. You're going to have a legacy system, right? You're going to have a server-based system that is kind of solves a narrower problem. And really what's happened in healthcare over the last 10 to 15 years is this adoption to cloud. And what that does is it allows you to connect everything in your enterprise, right? But it also allows you, if you're using a platform like Sonicu, it allows you to use APIs to send data where you want to send data. It allows you to pull data into the platform from like local control systems. We have a lot of examples in healthcare where we're pulling some data from the building management system that's built for control but not for compliance, to help kind of solve compliance in certain areas of the hospital. And so there's a lot of that legacy stuff that's out there, and there's not a lot of satisfaction overall with it, right? And so we're starting to really see that transformation where it's like, okay, we need a modern system that can empower APIs, that can help us aggregate this data, that can help us be more efficient with our operations. I think it's a real opportunity for companies like us in the space over the next decade to help these hospitals really transform their approach to environmental monitoring.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Talking the Walk on Healthcare Now Radio. I'm Tom Testa, and joining me today is Joe Mundell, the President and Chief Revenue Officer of Sonicu. Well, Joe, this has been a great conversation. I want to dive a little deeper into specifically the compliance part of things here for a moment. It's traditionally been about checking boxes for audits. That's what a lot of folks might say. But how are organizations rethinking that mindset? And how can technology help teams feel continuously audit ready rather than scrambling when the time comes?
And that's a great question. And so I think at the core, Sonicu provides kind of an automated 24/7, 365 type of compliance platform, right? And we've learned a lot about regulatory over the years here, and both in hospitals and the FDA world and the pharmacy, and with the Board of Pharmacy or USP regulations. But at the heart of it, it all kind of works the same, and it sounds kind of simple, right? But it's like, let's make sure that you're doing what you need to do to make sure that these drugs or this environment is safe for patients or safe for staff. So, typically they'll get asked for 6 months of logs, and how you prepare 6 months of logs can be a little bit of work, or it can be a lot of work depending on how you're doing it, right? But then it's not just the logs. It's like, what happened during those 6 months? Was there anything that was out of range? If something was out of range, what are you doing? What are the corrective actions, right? And putting that together can be challenging. So Sonicu's built kind of an automated logging and automated reporting, but more importantly, we give the users of the system the ability to input those corrective actions. And all of that gets aggregated into kind of an excursion type of report. And it's important for a couple of reasons. It's important for regulatory compliance because then an inspector can say, okay, we see you had an excursion, here's what you did. But it's also really important for the product itself. All of the pharmaceutical manufacturers have specifications for how long things could be out of optimal temperature before they're no longer good. So having that data right at your fingertips is really helpful. Otherwise, you're doing a lot of manual or you're just throwing things away to be safe. The last piece of that kind of audit process is how do we know this is accurate, right? And accuracy is super important, obviously. We see this in pharmacy. We see it in a lot of areas where the FDA has oversight. They require a NIST certification. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Testing. And they have the official temperature and they provide reference sensors to that temperature. And you build this kind of certificate of traceability, right? This is an area that's really a challenge for a lot of our customers. How do they maintain that NIST certification? We have an automated program that our customers enroll in. We manage their expiration dates of their sensors. They snap in place. We can ship them new sensors that you unsnap the old, snap in the new. All of their calibration certificates are stored on the platform. And so, again, we're looking at the entire audit process and trying to help our clients hit that easy button. I talk to customers who say, yeah, we had an audit. We couldn't find our paper calibration certificates. It's like, oh, well, you should have those stored electronically. That's if you want to print them out, that's great. But just losing your calibration certs can be a challenge. So really, it's about automating the entire process, Tom, from logging to reporting to corrective actions to certification of the sensors and having a kind of a SOP around how you do that across your enterprise.
And I was going to say, Joe, to think about, on the labor side, the burnout side, or just a small staff with a 150-bed hospital where I may be wearing multiple hats, having this automated for me, I might not be the compliance officer for this hospital because we're not a huge health system or hospital. This is going to help me as a CFO or someone else in the leadership team to monitor this better. Yeah,
it's such a peace of mind thing for our clients. Mm-hmm. They can really stress out and the scrambling that they have to do to get ready for these. With Sonicu or with a platform like Sonicu's, teams are ready. You're 2 clicks away from giving them all the reports. You know that you've got your calibration certificates. You know you've got your corrective actions. And so that's just one less thing that these teams have to worry about.
That's true. No, and it brings me to my next question for you too. It's about, you introduce a new technology and sometimes people feel that it kind of brings on a complexity, right? Oh, new technology. How are we going to do this? How are we going to onboard? But in this case, it certainly sounds like the opposite can be true. So what are some of the immediate tangible benefits teams see when they move from paper-based processes to connected monitoring systems, whether it's for compliance, efficiency, things like that? What are some immediate benefits?
Yeah, well, at the heart of it, when you automate the compliance piece, no one goes into healthcare to do paperwork, right? Right. So I really think about it as, it just lines up with the mission. Every healthcare entity has a mission about improving the lives or improving the health of the communities they serve or something around that. When you think about it at scale, you think about a large healthcare organization where everyone is doing things the same way, where there's standardization. When, if Joint Commission comes into a hospital and every single department is handling temperature monitoring, environmental monitoring the same way, it's much easier for that healthcare facility. And we see a lot of fragmentation today, right? We see pharmacies done this and they implemented this 4 years ago, and lab is still over here doing, some data loggers or some manual. And the dining nutrition, they're doing something totally different. That lack of standardization, I think, is a real mistake for hospitals, right? Take the time and standardize a solution and make it scale.
Any other kind of frontline things you've seen and how this really impacts their day-to-day work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think just that's the thing that comes to mind the most. Obviously, when you have a smart alarm handling system with great alarm escalation and kind of modern alarm handling, I think it makes people feel much more protected about the work that they're doing, and we talk about visibility a lot. I had a vaccine manager who's now a customer of ours tell me that when she got a temperature alarm, she would get a notification that something was out of range. And their policy was that they had to go to the facility and check the product. And if the temperature was failing, they had to move the product. These things never happen at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, right? They happen over the 4th of July weekend or Christmas Eve, right? And so when you have a platform that puts a mobile app in your hand where you can see things in real time, she can look at that fridge and see, well, maybe it was just a blip from a compressor. Now it's going back down into normal range. Now you don't have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, leave your house, drive to the clinic, and do those things. So little stories about visibility here are super important. We have a research facility that does the Susan B. Komen research. If the monitoring system were to go down, someone has to be on site checking the temperature every 2 hours. And so, this data gets transmitted either over a cellular network or over the client's network via Ethernet or Wi-Fi. And this particular customer, their IT department would take down their network semi-routinely if they thought there was a cybersecurity risk, right? And so when their network went down, it didn't mean that their temperatures had failed. They just couldn't see the data. Someone would have to go in day or night, weekend or holiday, and manually check those temperatures. And so, with Sonicu, we deployed redundancy around that transmission methodology, right? So that particular client uses an Ethernet connectivity hub, but that hub also has a cellular failover modem built into it, right? So if their IT team takes down their network, it just fails over to cellular, and they can stay at home. They don't have to come into the research facility and manually check those temperatures. So we see things like that around quality of life all the time, Tom, up and down the entire technology stack.
That's great. Adding that peace of mind to everyone. That's fantastic, Joe. Got another question for you. One more as we kind of start to wind up this excellent conversation we've had today. Joe, for healthcare leaders listening, especially those who may still be relying on the manual processes we talked about earlier, what's the first step they should be thinking about? They want to start modernizing without overwhelming their teams.
I always encourage an assessment, right? Our team here is consultative. We've got a lot of experience with other healthcare facilities, so we know what best practices look like. I always encourage an assessment. Let's look at it. Let's see where there's manual process that could be automated, right? Let's look at where things might make sense to standardize. And that doesn't have to be day one, right? You can build a playbook for, how you scale this across your organization, but do an assessment, see how much manual is going on, see if there are things that are fragmented or brittle alarm handling systems in place that are putting product at risk. We start there, right? And then we can tell them what we find, and most organizations can see the value coming out of an assessment like that, right? I think the biggest mistake you can make is, you try to over-engineer something up front. Look at something, we got to put this everywhere. Let's just do an assessment of where you guys are at. We can make recommendations, and we can build a path to how to get to where you're ultimately trying to go. The majority of our clients in the healthcare space, they don't jump in all across the board day one. A lot of our kind of enterprise standardized clients started off fixing this problem and then had a plan to evolve. And today they're in a great spot where they've standardized, but sometimes it's a lot to bite off from day one. So we have account managers that help those expansion initiatives with our clients, build a roadmap, build a rollout plan, and it might take a year, it might take 2 years, right? But that's kind of how it goes, right? You look at so many healthcare systems today, they operate under an umbrella, but sometimes that umbrella is just a brand. It's like you have 12 separate companies operating underneath one brand. And so, forcing something down from the top across the whole entire system can be difficult, but we can work with them underneath the kind of org that they've got to deploy Sonicu in a way that's meaningful for them. And I think, one thing, Tom, I don't know if we hit on this, but one of the biggest objections to technology is people think it's really complicated. Whether it's stated or not stated, the fear of implementation always exists. We took a look years ago at Sonicu and our sensors, and we tried to really emulate those companies on the consumer side that have done so well. I mean, everybody knows like a Ring doorbell or some type of smart thermostat. And what they're really, really good at is you get that product, you get a QR code, you get a mobile app implementation wizard that just walks you through. And we've built that into our platform so that really anybody with no tools, with very little technical acumen can install a sensor. And now, if you're a facility with 1,000 sensors, you may want to have a professional installation done because that's a bigger project, right? So we have install teams that do that. But we've really tried to make this as easy and as consumer-like as possible. And not by accident. When I started, years ago in this industry and saw just how heavy some of the legacy companies are, and wiring and so many connected things to a local computer. And it's like, wow, it doesn't have to be that complicated, right? Let's really simplify this implementation and modernize this implementation because, at the end of the day, customers aren't going to adopt this type of technology if implementation is super challenging. So that's been an emphasis on us for the better part of the decade. And, we're leveraging those tools to use a mobile app, and connect to the sensor wirelessly and give people a big green checkbox when they've done the step they need to do and show them step 2 and step 3 to really make it simple. And then we also back that up with people, right? We have dedicated, customer success team who helps people with training, helps to make sure that they have what they need. But here's what's really interesting. If we talk about some of the legacy systems that are out there, as the years go by, those systems age and they become less and less effective because the setup they originally had is no longer representative of their operations. Whether it's users who are supposed to get alarms or users who are logging into the system. And so, we get some really smart technology guys here at Sonicu, and we built some tools that are like snapshot tools that help someone say, hey, look, did you know you have these alarms set up and no one is active who you have on these alarms? I mean, simple things. You have a user who's supposed to get this alarm who hasn't logged into the system in more than 6 weeks. Is this user active, right? Just little things like that help keep the system fresh that we've built in because we think about long term. This isn't a 1-year technology commitment, right? This is something you put in and hopefully have a decade or more of ROI.
No, Joe, this has been great. I can't thank you enough. I feel bad that we're out of time here, but this has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate the insights today, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Tom, thanks for hosting us.
Thanks for joining me today, Joe. If you'd like more information on Sonicu, visit their website at sonicu.com. That's SONICU.com. You can also connect with Joe on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on Talking the Walk. Tune in to hear us weekdays at 8:30 a.m., 4:30 p.m., and 12:30 a.m. Eastern Time. You can also find all of our episodes on the Talking the Walk program page on healthcarenowradio.com. If you're walking the talk, we want to talk to you. Connect with me on LinkedIn or by filling out the show's contact form on healthcarenowradio.com. Until next time, I'm Tom Testa. Take care, everyone.